Hi everyone, I just want to take a moment just to go over something that I found a little bit confusing, and it's to do with why the number of customers measure doesn't change while the other cells in the pivot table do. Now that's why I'm going to explain what the initial filter context is, how to read it, and most importantly understand how Power Pivot reads it and what it's doing in the background. Now chaps, I'm still on practice exercise number 8 and I've just inserted a new pivot table in cell B44, and all we've got here is products. From the products table, number of customers, I've put in number of products and total sales, so it's all measures that we've already created. Now I'm going to home in on cell E45 and think about how this result has actually been returned. Now in DAX Power Pivot speak, this says the initial filter context for this cell is products category equals accessories. So that's the initial filter context, guys, and it really helps to say it out loud. You might feel a bit daft, but while you're learning, say it out loud. The initial filter context for this cell is products category equals accessories. Now E46, in the same vein, when we speak Power Pivot, we're saying the initial filter context for this cell is products category equals bikes. Next cell down, etc. Now remember to state the table name whilst you're doing this to reinforce where that data originates. Now technically the filters propagate from one table to another, but it's the flow and the direction that I want to drive home, and through the medium of diagrams and visual aids I'll demonstrate what's actually going on, and this will help you to visualize it. So the initial filter context coming from the pivot table is applied to the underlying table or tables in the data model. Before we go over to Power Pivot into the data model, let's just reinforce the cell that we're homing in on. The initial filter context for this cell is products category equals accessories. So let's go over to Power Pivot into the data model. I'm on the product sheet and I've rearranged the columns slightly, so don't worry too much if this doesn't reflect exactly what you're seeing on screen, but we're just simulating what's going on. So here's the products table, here's the category. So what's actually happening here is that it's being filtered so that we only see accessories. Everything else has been filtered out. Okay, so the product table now has got 35 products remaining and they're all accessories. So if we go to diagram view, now it's the product key between products and the sales table. If I just click on the connection between those two tables, you can see product key is highlighted here and at the top. And it's through the product key field that we've got this connection. So from the products table, those 35 products which are accessories, they're now being propagated down that connection, so it's flowing downhill, guys, down into the sales. That's why it's good to have your sales table, your data table at the bottom, and have your lookup tables above it, so you can visualize that the flow is flowing downhill. It's flowing from the lookup table, the one side, down the connection to the many side, to our data table, our sales table. So those 35 product keys that are now remaining are being propagated down this connection into the sales table. Now let's pop back into data view and again simulating what's going on here. So now those 35 product keys, if we go to the sales table, have been propagated into the sales table, and let's simulate that. So we've got a sales category table. We did that, we created that connection there with the related. Do you remember, with the related DAX function? So let's manually simulate what's going on, and we'll select accessories. So now it's those 35 product keys that have been propagated down that connection from products table down through the connection to sales, and now we've got just those 35 products. Now look at the total sales. Is 700,076. So that is matching up exactly to what's being returned in our pivot table. Now chaps, remember this isn't really happening. The tables are not being filtered in the background. Power Pivot is doing this on the fly, but it's good for our learning to think of the tables being physically filtered, as it helps to reinforce our understanding. Okay, so just drive that home, guys. It's all been done on the fly. These tables are always static, nothing's filtered. And also let me point out that by manually filtering, we go back to the pivot table there, it has no effect on the displays in our pivot table. So think back, guys, we have just been manually filtering these tables, but it has absolutely no effect on the results in our pivot table. Now, next up, guys, because that was just for cell E45, the same exact process will now happen for cell E46. So visualize that in your heads, guys. So the initial filter context for this cell will be products table category equals bikes. And now visualize what's going on in the background, how that's being filtered, the products table being filtered, those product keys being propagated down that connection into the sales table being filtered so that the product category is just bikes, and then that total sales sum returns the value of 28 million. Did you visualize it? Great. Right, so next up, guys, I'm going to talk about filter propagation. Now, all cells are an island. They are evaluated using the same process without regard for any other cell in the pivot table. Let's focus on cell C46. Now, the initial filter context is products category equals bikes. So instead of hopping over backwards and forwards into the data model, I'll just bring in a diagram view screenshot and we'll walk through this. So the initial filter context is applied to the table, which is products category equals bikes. The products table, that's number 1 in the screenshot, is then filtered so that only rows in the table that are equal to bikes remain. So this filter list via the product key propagates downhill through the relationships between the product and the sales table, that's number 2. The sales table is then filtered so that only the same products, remember we've got the product keys being propagated through that connection, they are the only ones that remain in the sales table, i.e. the bikes, and they're the only ones listed in the sales table, which is now number 3. Now the filter applied to the sales table does not automatically flow back uphill to the customers table, or to any other table for that matter. That's number 4. Filters only automatically propagate through relationships downhill, guys, from the one side of the relationship to the many side. That's our sales table. This means that the customer table is completely unfiltered by the initial filter context, and therefore the total number of customers is returned to the pivot table, and this is true for every other cell for this measure in the current pivot table. So let me just say that again. The filter applied to the sales table does not automatically flow back uphill to the customers table. That's why we're seeing the total number of customers. Now, on a side note, chaps, it's more likely that you're going to receive a warning message suggesting that the relationships may be needed. This pops up whenever Excel detects that the filter context in your pivot table is not filtering your measures. So the reason we're seeing it is because the initial filter context from the products table, i.e. products category on rows, is not filtering the number of customers measure. That's why we're getting that warning message. It's not going back uphill to filter that customers table. Now Power Pivot realizes there may be a mistake and displays the warning, and sometimes this warning is valid if you've forgotten to create your relationships, but there are just about as many false warnings as there are valid or true warnings, chaps. It's just something you're going to have to get used to, and it is by design. It's not Power Pivot getting it wrong as such. That's the way it's designed. So it's just warning you because you're going uphill again. Are you sure this is what you want to do? So it's a safety net, really. Now, one piece of advice I can give you is never ever select the create option on that warning. It can throw up all sorts of errors while Power Pivot tries to detect the problem for itself, and you'll have no idea what it's done, what it's doing or trying to do in the background. So don't click that create button and try to get Power Pivot to rectify those warning messages. So try to work it out for yourself. If you're sure the relationship's in place, then that's fine, you can dismiss it. Or if you think it's just because it's the filtering's flowing uphill, you know that your measure's correct, then again you can just dismiss it. But it is Power Pivot doing what it's meant to do by design. Okay guys, I hope that's just cleared up a couple of issues that may have been lurking about what's going on and why those values display in your pivot tables. Okay, I'm going to go into a little bit more depth a little bit later on, but that's just a roundup of the initial filter context and filter propagation. Okay chaps, see you later.